G'day, everyone. Welcome to the latest instalment of the NRL Market Watch podcast. It's proudly brought to you by TopSport.com.au. Remember, they are the home of the best multis. I just get a little sense in the abbreviated round that is round 13 that there's going to be a whole lot of hijinks during the course of the next half hour or so. The usual suspects are in attendance. I'm talking about Tristan Merlehan. He's the number one seed up there at TopSport. I'm talking about Gerard Condon. He is your expert from readingtheplay.com.au. How are you, gentlemen?
Yeah, very good, Jimmy. Very good. We got the change up. Only 4 games of NRL to price up, and then obviously Origin. But it's always a little bit tricky this time of the year to price these games because you have some new players coming into teams that you maybe don't have. You're losing some star players. At least we know who's fronting up, which is a little bit different next week. Next week's always the really tricky weekend. But yeah, it's had us on our toes. There's already been a couple of decent moves so far this weekend. So looking forward to chatting through the 4 games.
Afternoon, gentlemen. Yes, sometimes these abbreviated 4-round weekends can be absolutely horrible and really difficult to try and find anything that's worth looking at. I didn't think so this week. I thought all 4 games have got an element of stuff that we want to have a look at, 3 in particular. So at least we've got something that's a bit attractive. I think the Origin series, which we'll touch on in a moment, is just going to be a cracker. It looks really close. And we'll probably spend, 30, 40 minutes trying to work out what happened with the lunch bets before we even get started. I mean, Jimmy, our good lady who does all the bookwork here said to me, can we just get all of this sorted before you get into the podcast this week? I'm sick of Jimmy in the background.
Gerard, I thought you'd never ask, so let me go through it. As we do here, we look back before we look forward. Yes, and a special Origin edition of the podcast will be out next Tuesday, so make sure you're looking out for that. So last week, these are the collects for Pass It On clothing. $90 from the Broncos, minus 7.5. That looked never in doubt, Gerard.
Oh, never in doubt, Jimmy. No, I wasn't nervous at any stage.
Oh, by the way, yeah, there we go. Yeah, Tristan, just to let you know, the TopSport Titans are... Jeez. Anyway, $80 from the Roosters plus the 1.5. We got the $184 collect from Kiss Sum for that place. So a grand total of $354 going in for Pass It On clothing. But the real interest comes in the lunch bets. Now, just be patient. Gerard had a loss with the Kiss Sum and then a win with the Roosters plus 1.5 and a win with the overs for the Sharks and the Roosters game. I had a win with Kiss Sum, a win with the Roosters plus 1.5, and then a loss with the overs, Sharks, Roosters. So it's sort of balancing itself up here a little bit. And then we get to this. Tristan, what is it? Out with one hand and out with the other. The loss with the Sharks minus 1.5 and the loss with the Sharks minus 1.5. So all up, where are we with our Pass It On clothing bank balance, Tristan?
So we've got a total balance of 6,715 with the fines to pop in there. So there'll be an extra couple of hundred in fines, I believe, that have to pop into the end of the account. So I've got to contribute 100 there after backing the Sharkies in. And they gave a little bit of a scare for you guys late, but they were never really in the hunt. But I'm actually taking it as a bit of a blessing this week, because if you guys were a little bit more persuasive, you would have got me hooked in for the Titans, and I would have been absolutely distraught if I'd have lost the lunch bet after being 24 points up at one point.
Yes, I think for the listeners last week, that was funny. There would have been at least 2 goes that we tried to have a crack at getting the Titans Broncos in, and here I am sitting at halftime in that game going for a very strong dream at 24-4 thinking, gosh, I'm glad I dodged that one. I'm going to lose on the game anyway, but it wasn't to be. But yes, 6-9-1-5. Now, the really good thing for the listeners to also understand is that this year we added a $50 penalty to the loser of the lunch bet. And so far we've had $650 collected just amongst ourselves as additional donations to the funds we're raising. And so not only is the lunch bet fun, but it also comes with a penalty if you're on the wrong end of it.
Just on that, the ladder, just to update you there, Gerard, you've played 10 times. You've won 6, lost 4, net of +2. Tristan played 8, won 3, lost 5, net -2. And then I've played 14. So clearly getting involved in the midweekers as well here. That 1, 6, lost 8, net -2. So that's where the 650 additional the donations come from. And Long may they continue. Remember, and openly encouraged to get involved in a lunch bet during the course of this week's podcast as well. By the way, if you are listening and you're enjoying it, make sure you subscribe by Spotify, Apple. Go to Apple, write a review. That'd be lovely. Very easy to do on your app. Remember, you can check us out on YouTube as well. All right, boys, before we get into the 4 games, let's have a look at some of the news that's going around with rugby league. Obviously, the big one is the Origin. Teams have been announced, now been finalised, we think. First of all, Tristan, what's the market saying? Has it changed at all since the announcement of the teams?
Yeah, so this market, we've obviously had the market up for an extended period, and there has been a lot of ins and outs. Turbo, obviously the most significant, along with Latrell back when he was originally looking like he was going to play a long time ago. But that was 8.5 the line. Since the teams have been finalised, we opened the betting at 3.5. It was $1.65 New South Wales, $2.25 Queensland. We're now 162 New South Wales, 235 Queensland. The line's still 3.5, but we have gone 180 the minus $2 the plus. So the question will be, will this line get to 4? Will it hang on that 3.5 number? 36.5 the total points, which is around about the number we've seen for a lot of State of Origin totals, in recent years. And it's a little bit surprising considering we have seen a downward pressure on the total points in the NRL over the last while, but the Origin market, considering it's going to be a close game, still seems to be around that same number. So it'll be interesting if there's any movement in that one.
Very interesting too, because game 1 traditionally of each Origin series, the total point mark in past years has always been somewhere around 36.5. And the record of under 36.5 in game 1 is incredibly high. So that's a very interesting watch. Tristan, I would have thought that with the key outs for New South Wales, which is obviously Latrell and then Turbo, but also in the back of that is Pappenhausen, because I think had he been available, he would have been slotted in there somewhere. Those 3 outs, in particular the first 2, I think are somewhere around a 10 to 12 point move on the line for my numbers. Now, the market probably might have been maybe about 8. But that's really swung the game around. And then looking at the teams and that lineup, now traditionally for a Sydney game, as we get into Tuesday, Wednesday, there's normally really strong support for New South Wales. I'm not sure it gets back to 4.5. I have a hunch that if it's nearly tipping into toward 2.5 now, we might end up with a 2.5 at the game.
Is due for fine weather too over the course of the next week, which is most unusual for Sydney town. But yeah, you're right. Traditionally tighter games, although you remember last year up at that Townsville Queensland Country Bank Stadium, it was a dry track. They were running amok there, the New South Wales Blues. I think it's a really interesting battle in the coaches' boxes. I know we're going to talk about this a lot more on Tuesday, but Billy Slater thus far has not put a foot wrong. And it's interesting, the market responds to the team that he selects. And there's lots of parts about coaching. One of them is selection. And it would seem the market thinks that he's got it right. He pulled a few, I won't say rabbits out of the hat, but there was probably swimming against the tide a little bit. Ben Hunt starting, Harry Grant from the bench, and let's wait and see whether this all transpires. But Xavier Coates in there instead of Corey Oates, and Selwyn Cobbo, and so all that's got to be played out yet. But as far as smooth sailing goes, I did hear a quote from Josh Hannay today, or it was an interview yesterday, saying, that side's all settled unless there's a virus or something goes through the squad. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. That's about Friday for the Queensland Origin side that they start talking about the viruses. It's amazing. You set your clock to it, but there you go.
Jimmy, that whole coaching scenario is incredibly interesting, because if we go back 3 series ago to 2019, Fittler was in charge. New South Wales won game 2 and game 3 and won the series. We go into 2020 and Big Wayne came riding in from left field on his horse, and Queensland, a major upset late in the first game, which is in Adelaide, and won 18-14. New South Wales absolutely dished them up in the second game, which was in Sydney 34-10. And we might remember two things about that. One was Wayne walking around the dressing room and then sitting in the corner joking and laughing after the game, just taking all the sting out of the Queensland guys, making them feel comfortable and relaxed, and then caused that enormous upset in game 3 with a 2014 win back at home in Suncorp. But it was also notable after game 2, a certain journalist was suggesting that the Queensland team was the worst team in the 50 years of rep football, lo and behold. And so all of a sudden, Wayne Bennett, against all the odds, won that series. We go into last year and Paul Green was coach of Queensland. They got walloped 50-6 in game 1. They got walloped in game 2, 26-0. Now, out of those first 2 games, there was a lot of focus around really poor preparation, a really poor camp, a lot of whinging and noise coming out around what was happening with the coach. Suggestions that in game 1, the players were being played who were injured. And I thought New South Wales had some excuses in game 3. They lost their halves. They still had a very strong side. Queensland ended up getting up and winning that last game. But Paul Green was then showing the door. We now have Billy Slater coming back through the other side. A really interesting setup, and again in their selections, but I just think the matchup of those two coaches and tactically what unfolds here is going to be very, very intriguing.
Speaking of coaches, the big news in the NRL is, what's happening with the coaching position. We know there's a vacancy at the Bulldogs. We're anticipating a vacancy at the Tigers, rightly or wrongly. I know you don't have the markets up for that, Tristan, but it seems incredible, isn't it, that the crazy world of rugby league is that the guy who is potentially going to be sacked at the West Tigers is in some quarters seen as a solution to the Bulldogs' problem, who are just one spot lower on the ladder.
It's absolutely fascinating and phenomenal. And, maybe Madge has obviously built that reputation of, over the years and hasn't quite worked at the Tigers of being that, defensively minded, that real hardworking, like potentially that's the Dogs of War fit at Canterbury. Potentially there's that, you can paint that narrative and maybe that's what they're doing, but it's hard to me to see that that's the solution at the moment. But we'll see. And as you say, I'm glad we're not allowed to put a market up on that because it would be similar to having our fine jar for our pass it on clothing, because it's whenever we put markets like that up, we're just donating to the punters. They're always too shrewd in that space.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it, Jimmy? I mean, I'm sure for Phil Gould that there's no rush, and clearly he's made that point. All the drums seem to be beating that he's taken counsel from different people, considering different options, and who knows what then unfolds with that into the weeks ahead. The Tigers, I mean, I think it's personally somewhat embarrassing, and the way the whole thing has been structured and then leaked, and now Tim Sheens has pushed it front and centre for this supposed health check. I mean, if all of that's unfolding and that's then in the media for the last 4 or 5 days, I don't know anything, but you would have to suspect that Michael Maguire is dead in the water, that at some stage over the next couple of days, and I'm sure it will be conveniently timed so that it probably comes out Sunday or Monday when all the news and media is around Origin, and so it just sort of becomes somewhat less of the story that Maguire has shown the door. Whether Kamali ends up stepping in, that seems to be the street corner tip as the interim till the end of the season. Maybe John Morris is somewhere in the background, who knows. Yeah, it's ended up a mess. I mean, with all of the injury outs that he's had, they're 3 from 12. I'm sure they would have liked a better position than that. But one game, I think they've been competitive.
Yeah, I've mentioned it a couple of times on radio this week. If they come out and say we're conducting a review and they do that publicly and then they don't sack him, it's inexplicable. I really don't understand it. Why would you even tell anyone that you're doing that? It happens all the time in footy clubs and we never hear about it. And that's probably says more about the West Tigers than anything else. My information is that Gus Gould is seeking counsel from all and any about the coaching options. And as you say, there's no rush. There's no there's you got to find your man, and once you do, you go hard for him. Now, whether Serraldo is that man and they can't get him over the line, and whether he fits the bill as an experienced coach, because Gus has gone on record as saying that. But then again, when under the headline on Wide World of Sports website the other day, Phil Gould denies interest in Michael Maguire, and if you actually listen to the grab from 100% footy, at no point did he deny an interest in Michael Maguire. So all of that points to what's going to be some very interesting machinations across those two clubs.
Jimmy, the other really big talking point, and I think it's also been an absolute shambles. As we were doing the podcast Wednesday afternoon of last week, the news broke, which we touched on here, I think at the time, of all of a sudden Payne Haas seeking a release. That then has become a dominant story over the last 7 days. It seems to now have settled, but my goodness, that's just been an absolute train crash, the way that's been managed, how poorly the PR has unfolded, so much so to see a, 3/4 full Suncorp Stadium last Friday night doing one of their best.
And the way that the Titans got on top of them early, it had to have an impact in the way they played, and obviously still put in a good effort. But it just felt like they've had such a strong season, and just for something like that to potentially start to derail it, it's very poor timing. And obviously there's been some further discussion since and surrounding it. But yeah, it certainly caught everyone by surprise, and it'll be interesting to watch how that plays out.
What's the point of managing Payne Haas if you don't get paid for managing Payne Haas? I think that's the one we can take out of it on that one. Just before we get to these games now, we are literally at the halfway point of the season. All clubs have played 12 games. So you've got your ratings from the start of the season, Gerard. You've also got your revised team ratings as per their performances across those 12 rounds. Do you want to take us through any movers and shakers that you might have there?
Well, Jimmy, I just thought I'd quickly highlight a couple of the obvious ones. Now, I've got the if we were to call this a number out of 10, I think the Panthers are now 10 out of 10. I've moved them up from being 9.8 up to 10 out of 10. Storm slightly behind them. Eels, third spot, about the same. The Roosters I've got back, about 4 percentage points. But they're somewhere in the middle there in the mix, Jimmy.
Top six?
Top six.
They've got top six written all over them, haven't they, Gerard?
Yeah, well, we'll wait and see, Jimmy. We'll wait and see. The Sharks clearly have been improvers. Now, the really big one, and I touched on last week, the two that have been very difficult to try and get a number on each week is the Cowboys. Massive improvement. I had them rated down in the bottom 4. They currently sit in the top 5. Top 6, and potentially that's somewhere on the table that they can finish. And then the next one clearly is the Broncos, who were probably sitting somewhere around 10th or 11th. They're again in the top 4 and nipping at the heels of that. And the other two that are sliding and keep sliding are the Rabbits and the Eagles. Now, we touched on very briefly last week, it's going to be really interesting what happens at those bottom 2 spots. Do the Roosters stand up and stay in that top 6? Do the Rabbits continue to fall? The Eagles have lost Turbo, and how much impact does that have on them later on into the season? And does that end up opening a door for the Raiders and or the Dragons? Still a lot to play out, and at least we're seeing outside of the benchmark being the Panthers and potentially the Storm as they get players back, those top 2, we're still seeing a lot of competition, and that any of those other teams around them can beat each other if they're up and they've got a viable list each week.
And how many doors need to open for the Titans to be considered for the top 8?
I'd say 43.
As long as there's a door going into the TopSport lounge at Titans Stadium, that's the only door that needs to open as far as you're concerned, Tristan. Okay. Book
exactly
8.
right.
If you're thinking of holidaying in September, make that booking, mate. All right. just a little advice for you on that one.
Jimmy, we're leading into the games now, but if ever there was a coach who was absolutely white and shell-shocked, it was Holbrook after that game last week in the press conference. And he made a very good point. He said, we didn't just drop our bundle from the start. We did in the first half. What a reflection of how well we trained during the week, our preparation, where we wanted to play the Broncos, all of that sort of stuff, to go in at 24-4 at half time and then completely compound as quickly as they did in the second half. Dear, oh dear. I mean, I love coaching, but there's days like that where you just go, holy doodly.
And on that as well, like like just the way and the short kickoff and these sort of things, and it's just like you just sit there and you shake your head but it's happened so many times throughout the course of this year, and I guess from obviously a fan's point of view on it, that there's some teams you look at like the Bulldogs and you look at the Tigers where they're probably lacking on the playing front and they're trying very hard, but the Titans have been in a lot of these games and they've just either given up big leads or they've charged home, and it's just very frustrating. I can only imagine how frustrating it is from their perspective as well.
Gerard, you have no respect whatsoever for our host here. What you've done is you've run over him, and then you've backed over the carcass again, and then you thought well, he's there. I might as well have another go at him as if you've gone over the top. All right. Look.
Oh, no.
One thing though. I have to come clean, and I hope the Titans attended another Gold Coast sporting establishment whilst that game was in play, so I didn't have to witness the absolute disaster of their performance. And it was a complete flip side. The Gold Coast Rollers were playing, and we were out there, and they were down 23-2 at the same time. The Titans were up 24-0. And the Rollers happened to come back and win the game in the last second, whilst the Titans happened to butcher it. So I don't know whether we might have to revise our strategy. I'm not sure.
The Gold Coast TopSport Rollers doesn't quite come off the tongue as well as the TopSport Titans. Anyway, each to that. Oh, look at the first game of the round. There it is. It's those TopSport Titans getting stuck in again up against the Cowboys. So let's have a look at it. No Tino. He was superb. Dave Fafita out with injury. Mo Whatuaka back in with the ankle, coming off that ankle injury. Isaac Liu into the lock forward position. Paddy Herbert is back in. Issa Masters is back out to the bench, and Toby Sexton and Jermaine Asako have to pass fitness tests. They have been named following that game against the Broncos. So here's the interesting one. Taumalolo is named as well, but there's no Val Holmes, no Reuben Cotter, Tommy Dearden and Jeremiah Nanai. Murray Taulagi and Hamiso Tabuai-Fido come back into that squad despite the fact they've been named in that side. Brendan Elliott comes in on the wing. Haven't heard that name for a while. Benny Hampton is the new 5'8", and Cohen Hess is up to prop. Holem Lukey into the starting side, and Connolly Limu-Ilu joins the bench. So there we go. This is the first of these tricky ones, Tristan, that you have to price up.
Very tricky one. We were 275 about the Titans early. Cowboys 145. They've been back from 275 into 255, 153 the Cowboys, and that line's crossed over the key number of 6. We opened it at 6.5. It's now into 5.5. Short of the plus 185, the plus 195, the minus 42.5 the total points, and total short kickoffs by the Titans 0.5, $1.20 the unders.
That's very good. I don't think that short kickoff is going to happen again this season for the Titans. And I will say, Jimmy, I actually have a soft spot for the Titans, which I have said a number of times over the last 18 months. And I'm just as disappointed as anybody that their season hasn't gone the way that we expected. I thought that they were a chance of being somewhere mid-table, but I have to take them on trust here. I'm hopeful that Holbrook can get hold of them and balance them up and try and get their heads right. Now, they're back at home. We know that their best football's been back at home and at the line, as we touched on 2 weeks ago when they played the Sharks and had that 1 point field goal late in the game that hurt us on the line. Their record at covering the line at home has been very good. 6 of the last 9. Probably should read 7. This market opened at 6.5. I thought, based on the teams that I see, I thought it should have been about. I thought the Titans should have been about evens, and so 5.5 is 5.5 more than where I thought the market should have been. The thing with the Cowboys is that they've got an away game in Sydney. Now they come up here to Rabina for another away leg. I suggest that they've been on the road, staying away as they head back home after this. I've got a major question mark about whether Tomalomo does play. His knee didn't look flash when he came off 2 weeks ago. And then on the back of that, there's another 5 outs. A key one is Dearden in the halves, but then they've also got 3 very good origin reps. It really brings them back if I take all of those 6 out. So tricky game. I respect the Cowboys' defence, but they've got those key changes. I'm just a hunch that the Titans are still okay, and I thought the +5.5 should put them well into the game, and really interesting mentally how they aim up.
Yeah, I see the loss of Tino as so significant because he is such a leader for that team. So we've got the actions of Tino, and then we've got the leadership of Tino. So that's the one that's hard to quantify. I mean, Campbell at the back has looked solid, even though he's not solid. But beyond that, oh wow, they are brittle mentally as much as anything, aren't they? I'm looking at this Cowboys side, and I reckon that Todd Payton is looking at a next man up mentality. I'm saying this on the proviso that Taumalolo plays, and the wind's coming from the west, and everything else needs to be right too, as you know, Jared. But I look at that, and I think in key positions, the key players, Cohen Hess is there, Jordan McLean up front, Robson, Townsend at half, and Drinkwater at the back. Petahiku, I think, has been a really strong, steadying influence for this Cowboys side. I think the -5.5 is attractive to me. So I don't know what you want to do with that, but putting it out there.
I can, it'd be not TopSport Titans. I'm going to the game, so I need to have a little lunch bet or a dinner bet. So I'm certainly keen to take that on, particularly if Jared's got the game rated off scratch, then I'm very keen to be involved.
Yeah, that's two of us.
Okay, so that, just to clarify, that's not a halftime score, Tristan. So I just want to be clear about that, right?
And Jimmy, also just to be clear that we're this bet is on, regardless of what unfolds on Thursday night. This bet is on.
If Taumalolo's out, so how do we work that?
Well, you're either in or you're out today.
Mate, he's been named, but you just said he's probably not going to play.
That's my expectation. I don't know anything.
I think it's significant. Anyway, look.
Are you in, Jimmy, or yeah?
I'm in if Taumalolo plays. Mate, how easy is it? What administrative roles do we need to fill to cancel a lunch bet if Taumalolo's in or out? I'll send you a text message, yes or no, an hour before the game.
Mate, Tristan and I may as well wait till Saturday to pick a horse bet till 15 minutes before and a four horse race and go for the $1.80 favourite.
I've just come up with a new product on our website that you can have a bet on a team subject to X, Y, Z, and name your price.
Yeah, no, all right. What a good idea. What a great idea. There we go. All right. Okay. So what are you doing, boys?
Mate, we're in either way. Yeah. We're just trying to work out what you're doing.
Sorry, what was that, Jared? You're in either way. All right. Done.
Taumalolo plays or doesn't play, I'm in.
Okay. What's the line move if he does play as opposed to not playing, Tristan?
Oh, it's a tricky one because he's such an influential player, but I think the market has him probably priced out, I would suggest. So it won't move as hard as what it would if he was completely out. I reckon it probably gets to maybe 4 or 3.5 would be my guesstimate if he doesn't play.
Yeah, I think some of that's already factored in, but I think what'll then happen is the punters will go, oh, well, that's still got to be a good price because he's now out, and there'll be money that moves it, not necessarily what the market is. So, yeah, I think probably 3.5 it gets to if he's out.
That's the greatest bit of insurance policy I think I've ever heard from the two of you. You blokes were in collusion prior to this podcast. So I've got no doubt about that. Anyway.
Mate, after we do the podcast, you go out the back and get the tweezers out and pull the splinters out of your backside.
Mate, I think it's a legitimate thing. And if you're a punter and you're not doing that, anyway.
And if it's legitimate, then don't have the bet.
Mate, you said it's been factored in anyway.
I hadn't factored the Jimmy Smith factor in.
All right. We eventually get here. Second game of round 13. It's the Panthers up against the Bulldogs. So here we go. Apparently there's a few changes for the Panthers. Yeah, Nathan Cleary's out. So Sean O'Sullivan, been there, done that, comes in. Jerome Luai out. Kurt Falls making his NRL debut. Charlie Staines and Robert Jennings into the back line for Stephen Cryan and Brian Chris Smith and Matt Eisenhuth in for Liam Martin and Isaiah Yeo. Appy Coruscant comes back, even though he was named in the Blues reserves. So he does play. Tavita Pangai Jr. still out for the Bulldogs. Ray Faye Taylor Mariner into the starting side. Corey Waddell out to the bench. Avasi Umanafanai back into the bench. Joe Stimson to the reserves. Just to confirm, missed out on selection in the Blues side, but Josh Adokar will play for the Bulldogs side. Thoughts on this one, Tristan?
I think the Bulldogs would be extremely happy that they're taking the Panthers on in this week. And because I can only imagine what that line would have been if all the Panthers had been named or in the 22, and we would have still been discussing over if players line up or not for Jimmy to be involved in a lunch bet. But it's $1.33, the Panthers, $3.40, the Bulldogs, 9.5's the line. It did open at 10.5. It's come 9.5 in, and it's 185 the plus, 195 the minus. 38.5. Now, let's not forget that when the Tigers were flying, the Panthers were flying this time last year and the Tigers were battling, they took Penrith on in a similar situation. They were a massive go and they got the chocolates. We know there's a little bit of intensity at that game as well. I do think, though, from Penrith's point of view, despite missing all these players, I think Sean O'Sullivan is a much improved option than Tyrone May was when that occurred. So let's factor that in. The Bulldogs are obviously battling, but it certainly is a different game. And to put it in perspective, and I'd like to hear Jared's thoughts as well, if this game had been played last week, what he thought the line would be, I would suggest it would have been around the 26.5 mark if it was played last week.
Well, I did my number yesterday, and if it was played last week, my number was 32.5.
Okay.
So
was Taumalolo playing, or
Jimmy, we're on the game too.
Oh, sorry.
So I think that there's about a 22-point difference with those outs. Now, you're right, Tristan, that, the last couple of years when the Panthers have played these games through the Origin period, their focus has been around defence. They've had quiet games where, the attack has just been a little bit subtle, but they've had the odd loss, but they've been very competitive. I think this is a better side because you're right, O'Sullivan at 7. The other key thing is, Jimmy, I've heard some very good reports around this Kurt Falls and his form over recent weeks playing, well, probably since the start of the season, playing reserve grade and playing very, very well. So that looks a very good combination at 6 and 7. They've got a lot of quality talent and junior talent coming through, as we know. At Penrith Park, they're going to be really difficult to beat. Listen, at the moment, I've tried to be positive about the Bulldogs over the last couple of weeks. I like the fact that they do look a little looser and are trying to be a little bit more creative with the football, and scored 24 points last week, but it did take them a long time to get into the game. But that side going to Penrith Park, listen, the Panthers win. I still don't think 9.5 is enough.
Yeah, Falls is an interesting one. 25-year-old, so lots of experience. 80% goal kicker, so comes in from that point of view. 11 try assists in 10 games in the knock-on effect cup, the New South Wales Cup. So there's that bit of experience, and you're right about O'Sullivan and Tyrone May. Think about Taylor May and Isaac Tago in there as well too. So those guys were debuting. I think Tago debuted in that game against the Tigers. That was at Leichhardt, not at Penrith as well. So that's to be considered as well. They're just struggling, aren't they? The Bulldogs. I thought it was a low standard game against the Dragons. I really did. Penrith will continue winning. They will continue winning. The question mark around the line, and the loss of Yeo and the manner in which they play. So last time when O'Sullivan played, Yeo played. So he negates the need for Nathan. Now he's not there. Eisenhuth can't do not many can do what Isaiah Yeo does. So that's going to be really interesting. How does Ivan Cleary play now with no ball playing lock forward, and what added pressure does that put on Sean O'Sullivan? They've probably got the right team to play, right, when they're trying to work that out, and that is the team running 16th.
And Jimmy,
Yeah,
I thought sorry, Tristan, just on the back of that, and Tristan, I wanted to ask you whether there's been money for it, because I thought 38.5 looked high. For mine, I'm not sure how these two teams get to 40 points, because against a good defensive outfit, which I'm sure Penrith will be, the Bulldogs are going to struggle getting points. And then the two of them, I just can't see how we get to 40 points unless the Panthers get away with a result.
Yeah, and you're right. And one of the biggest impacts there, I don't know if we touched on it yet, but I believe Matt Duffy's been dropped as well. So that has a big impact both on the Bulldogs' attacking prowess, and they're probably slightly improves their defence as well. So that might have another impact on the total points there, I suggest.
So clarifying, is Duffy dropped? He's been named.
I was reading something today that I believe in a little article just popped up. So I thought it was official, but maybe it's not. But I'm pretty confident he won't be lining up for that side.
Isn't it funny? Because I nearly started talking about that game and say, well, I don't know why Matt Duffy hasn't been dropped. So,
I think Corey Allen will be coming in to take his spot. So that will, I think that, to echo your thoughts, Jared, I think that has a massive impact on the total points.
I was just a bit concerned that Jimmy was about to work on the overs or unders, but then it was contingent on whether Duffy played.
An hour ago, Daily Telegraph Sport reporting that Matt Duffy dumped for the game against the Penrith Panthers. So that is right. So that changes everything for me. So let me go back. Don't worry, I won't. Hey, talk about tough games to price. Here we go. The game 3 of round 13 is going to be played at Four Pines Park. It's the Seagulls up against the Warriors. So, again, we've got some changes. DCE obviously out with Origin. Marty Tapau, Jason Saab and Carl Lawton all come back into the squad. George Tafua out. That's probably a good thing for all Manly supporters. Lawton and Tapau onto the bench. So, Kieran Foran goes to halfback. Schuster gets his wish and he's playing 5'8". Dylan Walker named on the bench. He had that knee injury last week that looked very painful. So interesting to see how he can recover from that. Jake Trebojevic misses out for New South Wales. He takes over as captaincy for the Seagulls. Wade Egan and Bailey Sirinen have been named for the Warriors, and he's taking over from Freddie Lussick. Sirinen in at the expense of Dynamis Louis. Rocco Berry back at centre. He's a loss. Viliami Vailea, he's been one of their good ones, broken jaw, so he's out. Jack Murchie has been named at lock, but he's going to be monitored as well because of a head knock last week. Another tough one to price up, I reckon, Tristan.
A very tough one to price up because there's a lot of moving parts in this game. But the Seagulls, we opened them at 3.5 and about $1.65. They're now $1.53. New Zealand $2.55 and the Lions 5.5. It's short of the Seagulls at 5.5 now. 40.5 is the total point. So, there's a lot of ins and outs, and it's going to be interesting to see how the halves combo of Schuster and Foran gel, because we know there's been a lot of storylines behind the scenes there.
So, Jimmy, there's no load-outs for the Warriors. Nobody's had another bust up with the owner. No payouts or exits or see you later or they're dropping like flies over there at the moment, aren't they? I mean, they've lost Lodge and then they've lost Fanua Blake with injury. For mine, that's their two big key bodies in the middle, which were in good form. And when the Warriors were at least playing in patches of good football going back 3-4 weeks ago, those two guys were two of their best. They then also have Curran out. There's a question mark about Murchie. I just think that list is thin and falls away. When they've travelled, the last 13 times they've travelled like this to come to Sydney, they've lost 12 of those 13. Their last 2 away legs was a really ordinary game against the Dragons 2 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago, they had the Sharks at Shark Park. We know what a debacle that ended up with. So I'm very much against the Warriors. I think that I've said before, they're the 16th placed side for mine. We get the Eagles back at Brookvale. Now, their last 3 games have been away. They were in Brisbane against the Broncos when towed up, then went to Parramatta in a game that I thought they should have won. And then last week were poor again in Melbourne against the Storm. But it's a strong form line coming through 3 teams at the top in the top 4 or 5 of the table. 3 road games back to Brookvale. I like that. They're only losing Cherry Evans to rep football. Turbo's already been out for a week. I like what they've got in terms of experience at 6 and 7 and some of the depth around the list. Back at Brookvale, I thought the number was far, far higher than 5.5. I thought the Eagles should have been closer to nearly double digits on my numbers. Keen about the Eagles. I think they win. Comfortably in covering the line, and I've had something at the 13 plus as well.
Just to let you know, we're recording this on a Wednesday afternoon, so still time for about 3 or 4 blow-ups with Warriors owner Mark Robinson in the intermediate before we get kick off of that. And obviously at that point... They
tell me, Jimmy, that there's a very interesting story that surrounds all of that. And it may have been at Cronulla, maybe not at Redcliffe.
There we go. Hey, I actually disagree with you on the fact that I thought Manly, their effort was exceptional against the Storm. They were beaten by Munster, essentially. You have a think about that line speed, and remember Des had circled the wagons and he was looking for that response out of them. I think he got it, but they just didn't. They just didn't have the football that
and
Munster
2 Munster steals.
Yeah, which inflates the scoreline against them, which I thought was a little unfair, because you look at someone like Alawai and Sipley and Alokawatu, their effort was exceptional. The positive for the Warriors was Jazz Tavunga last week. They've got him at prop again. I was sceptical. He was fantastic, clearly their best player. I think Vailea is a loss because he was doing some good things. I think Sean Johnson is ready to have touch footy as the only part of his future. He just does not want to get involved in contact. Watch how many times he runs the footy and takes on the line. He did it once last week for a total of a 6-metre gain. He just doesn't want to get involved in that. So I'm with you, Jared. I'm with you with the Seagulls back home. I think their effort will be great again, and they'll win comfortably.
Just on that, boys, I agree. I think Manly's going to be too good. I thought their effort against the Storm was pretty solid as well. But if we were all at a pub and we were having a discussion, who do you feel would be the alpha male amongst the 3 of us after the discussion between Matty Lodge and the business owner? So I have a strong suspicion who the host is going to put forward. I'd like to hear his thoughts on a ranking system.
Because wasn't that the quote from the owner? 2 alpha males going at it?
Certainly was.
Yeah, I know which alpha male would have been most aggressive. I think history tells us that. I'd love to hear that. That's obviously that's an off-podcast story that we'll get.
That's one we ain't touching today, Jimmy.
Okay. We can look forward to that one. This last game of the round is a really interesting one. It's the Raiders up against the Roosters. So significant outs for both. Papali'i and Whiten out with the Maroons and the Blues respectively. Matty Frawley comes back into that number 6 jersey again. Corey Horsburgh is starting at prop. Harawira Naira comes in onto the bench and Schiller goes to 18th man. So that's the bit of a change for the Raiders. I thought Whiten was a high quality game, that Raiders Eels game. The Roosters, Joey Manu to fullback. Michael Maguire, the Kiwis coach, watching very carefully. Kevin Naingama goes into the centres. Billy Smith in on the wing for Daniel Tupou. Siwa Torquiaho, who is going to Catalans. He's going up the prop as well in the absence of Lindsay Collins. Satili Tupanua into the starting side, and Egan Butcher is the new guy on the bench. Joe Suwali, he'll come back, and he had that grade 1 concussion, but the expectation is that he will come back and play this game as well. Tristan, this is a beauty.
This is a beauty, and geez, I've been impressed with how the Raiders have gone the last 3 or 4 weeks. I know they didn't quite get the chocolates there against the Eels, but that was a good game, and they looked in trouble of really dropping out about a month ago. And I know we've been critical of Ricky over time here, whether he's had an influence on it or not, but the team has certainly lifted in the last 3 weeks. And again, at home, they're going to be very, very ordinary conditions, I would suggest, out there at Canberra. And $2.30 about them, I think, represents a bit of value. $1.62, the Roosters, and a flat 4 is the line. 40.5 the total points. Teddy's lifted this side up and carried them in a number of games this year. And we know how good Joey Manu is. He's an absolute superstar, but has he got the capabilities of doing that without his foil that Teddy has in him? So I just think this game's a little bit tighter than what the betting indicates.
Yeah, this is the trickiest game of the week. I only had 1.5 between them. And on those numbers, I guess the force suggests that, the Raiders at home probably should be a little bit of an interest. I stayed out because I just thought the game looked really tricky. And you're right, I thought Teddy's game last week was probably his best so far this season. And he's really been trying and had such an influence over the last 3 or 4 weeks. They end up with 5 outs. Now, they've got some depth, and I like the fact that they can put Manu back at fullback. Can patch up a wing. Collins is a bit of an out. They were very good last week with the other 2 injury outs in Radley and Varillis that they have. The Raiders, that's 3 weeks in a row now where they've been very, very good. They towed up Cronulla in Brisbane. They then went to Dubbo and towed up South. They were in that game neck and neck all the way until probably the last 10 or so minutes at home last week when the Eels actually stood up and were also good. It's a really good form line. As I said, I've got it really close. I just lent to the Roosters because I just thought that with that 9-7-6 and Manu back at 1 might well be enough to get them around the park. And back at this level, they do seem to play well, but it was a tricky game.
I'll give you Tedesco's statistics from last week. A try, 20 runs, 238 metres, 2 line breaks, 3 line break assists, 2 try assists and 9 tackle breaks. Like, that's just an exceptional game in anyone's language. I do like the fact that Manu gets a chance to show Michael Maguire what he could do for the Kiwis at fullback. History says, and he's only played 3 or 4 games there, but remember, I think his first game at fullback, he ran for 300 metres. That's a special talent. And if you're Trent Robinson, you're saying, Joey, this is why we pay you overs to be in the centres, because you've got to play these games at fullback. So
yep.
I want a special effort from him. I thought the Raiders' physical effort last week against the Eels was just exceptional. I thought that game was such a high-quality game. Ferocious. Ball movement, had a bit of everything. They missed Papali'i, they missed Whiten quite clearly. Really tight game. If I had to lean anywhere, I'd like the +4 with the home side because I think that's what represents value. But, cracking game of footy. Can't wait for that one. All right, Gerard, you better give us your tips for the round and you better give us your best bet of the round.
Jimmy, I'm with the Titans, the Panthers, the Eagles, the Roosters. I am also tipping Queensland next week. Anybody that's got tipping comps where they need an early tip, I'm just leaning Queensland's way there. I thought the best of the week was certainly the Eagles. We did tap Tristan on the shoulder earlier in the week for the -3.5. It's now 5.5. Against my numbers, I still think that that's too low. So the Eagles 3.5 at $1.90 or there and abouts was the best of the week. Looking ahead at Origin, I had 2 plays there. The 3.5 about Queensland at $1.90 I wanted to take. I just think that game ends up, and we'll talk about it at length on Tuesday in our podcast. That game just looks really close, and so I want to be with the team that's got the 3.5. I do think Queensland can be advantaged having the last game back in Brisbane, and so the second game's in Perth. I think the last game ends up being a decider, so I also want to back Queensland long-term to win the series at $2.30. So the Eagles at the minors, Queensland with the plus next Wednesday, and Queensland to win the series.
Can you, just out of the interest of the listener, can you disclose where you live, please?
Jimmy, I was born and bred in New South Wales. I do have a bit of a blue heart, lived in Queensland for the last 15 years. But as you and I often discuss, when I'm looking at football, it's through the head with my wallet, not necessarily my heart. And I did remind you on radio today, last year and the year before, we made, both of us, a lot of money out of backing New South Wales. So I don't have any problem backing New South Wales. I'm just looking for the winner.
Could you also disclose the colour of your jumper that you're wearing today?
I think it's nearly black, actually, Jimmy.
It's maroon.
Can I just put out there that I'm on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, and I punt with my heart a lot more than my head with all the Titans' wages, and I'm also just as confident about Queensland.
All right, well, just don't tip us one of the one of the horses that you've got to partner in either too, all right? We're sick of that. But anyway, before we get to the horse tip, I'm going back to the game on Friday night. I'm going for the Panthers and the Doggies. I'm going to go Taylor May anytime try scorer at $1.76 into Josh Addo-Carr to be an anytime try scorer as well. He will do everything in his power to get across the line and show Freddie what he's missing out on. So that'll be a $3.90 for me.
You didn't want to add another leg with Tomolomo in there for an anytime try scorer as well?
Well, what a good idea, Jared. Now you're giving me ideas. It's going to be a dangerous thing. Jared, have you got a horse for us this week?
I don't, Jimmy, because I had that extra bet on the Queensland to win the series.
Right. Yeah. And look, based on the performances of Kiss Sum, I'll probably jump into the role of horse specialist here.
Jimmy, I know there was only one horse in that race that you were watching, but if you happen to watch the replay, Star Tontes found more trouble than you normally do on a Friday night at a pub. So I'm certainly going to be all over Star Tontes at its next start.
Tristan, take me to Rose Hill, race 10. So we've got to be patient. Number 8, Dynamic Impact. Trialled super well. Got too far back at Scones. Going to improve. We'll be making an impact late. So I think the prices that we've got at the moment, 750, 260, all important staking plan here, as you know. And you know what? I'm going to go all out on the Lionel Rose. Thanks very much.
Wow. We know patience isn't one of the virtues God gave you, Jimmy, but yeah, very, very good to see race 10 and going on the nose. It's race 10, number 8, Dynamic Impact. It's $7.50 at the moment. So that is completely blown me away because I had already put the line down on my piece of paper. I write these bets down to work out whether it was 80 by 20, 70 by 30, but it's a absolute straight on the nose. So that's good. Well, there's a lot of confidence coming out of that camp. So hopefully we can get a big return there for our account that seems to be heading in the right direction. Now, I don't know when we're going to be able to get this podcast out because we're recording this a little bit earlier on a Wednesday, but I just want to touch on a little one just to keep an eye on. Bandit Ned, who our man Joe got me in on this one. It makes its return to the racetrack and it's meant to be flying. So watch it tonight. It's short, so it's not a betting proposition. It's $1.35, but he was one of the up-and-coming greyhounds in the country, and he goes around after an expel and hopefully fixed up a couple little injuries. So just monitor him tonight. Wentworth Park, race 5, number 2. He can blow this field away. He might be back and have a look at some of the future markets that he might be in, because if he can get back to the form he showed early on in his career, I think this spell might have done him the world of good.
So just to confirm that you're tipping us in with no time remaining into a dog that's $1.35. Just to clarify.
I'm tipping us into the dog that's $1.35 just to look at a couple of your $1 million chases, these sort of markets that he might, if he has a strong win tonight, maybe just have a little sniff around at what markets are available.
Listen, by the time it comes out, most of the listeners will be going, they'll be writing that down as a Jimmy bet.
We are 8:28 will be when they jump at Wenny Park for race 5. So there we go. You heard it here first, peeps. Well done, gentlemen. Little sidetracked at different stages. We will obviously converse, just determine just how fit Jason Taumalolo is and the extent of that knee injury. But otherwise, have a great weekend, gents.
Just before we sign off, that greyhound tip, it's only if he's in barrier 6 since we're putting caveats. Box 6 since we're putting caveats on tips.
And we'll be back Tuesday morning, gentlemen.
He hasn't got a rear left leg strapped or anything, has he? No? Is he okay? All right. Gents, we better fly.
See you guys.
See you later.